His uncle slid $7 across the kitchen table. "Bus leaves at 6. He didn't take the bus. He walked out the back door with one bag over his shoulder. 18 years in that house. That was the goodbye. The hardware store owner was sweeping the sidewalk when he passed. Didn't wave. The diner waitress looked through the window, then looked away. At the edge of town, he saw it. A rusted Quonset hut sitting alone in an empty field. Metal curved like a half-buried pipe. A sign nailed to a crooked post, $5 as is. He found Earl behind the gas station, handed over $5. Earl pocketed the money, nodded toward the field. "She's yours now. If you're watching from somewhere quiet tonight, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. And if you've been enjoying these stories, subscribing helps us keep sharing them with you." He woke 3 times that night, each time. The cold had crept deeper into his shoulders, his knees, his fingers curled inside his jacket sleeves. When the light came, he stood in the center of the Quonset and turned slowly. Worse. Everything looked worse in daylight. Rust holes the size of his fist, roof sagging in 2 places, the door hanging from one hinge, gap at the bottom wide enough for a cat to walk through. Dirt floor, hard-packed and cold. In the corner, a pile of junk, old tires, broken crates, a coffee can full of bent nails. 3 dented cans, labels faded, but he could make out the word beans on one. He opened it with his pocket knife. Cold beans. He ate half, scraping the spoon against the sides, saved the rest. Then he looked at the wall, the biggest hole. Fist-sized gaps where the metal had rusted through. He dragged the broken crates over, stacked them, pushed them tight against the gaps. The wood was soft, half-rotted, but it blocked the wind. He worked for 4 hours, adjusting, wedging, bracing. Splinters buried themselves in his palms. By the time he stepped back, his hands were bleeding in 3 places, but the wall looked solid. He allowed himself one long breath. That night, the wind came. He was lying on the dirt floor, jacket pulled over his chest, when he heard the first crack, then a scrape, then a crash. He didn't move. Another crash, wood hitting dirt, another. He lay still, counting. 4, 5, 6, 7. Silence. The wind poured through the wall like the crates had never been there. He stared at the dark ceiling. No anger came, no tears, just the cold, settling back into his bones. When morning light touched the holes in the roof, he sat up, his breath hung in the air. Across the room, the crates lay scattered, broken, useless. He looked at them for a long time. Then he stood, walked to the nearest board, picked it up, splinters still in his palms from yesterday. He didn't say anything, didn't plan, just held the board and looked at the wall. Somewhere outside, a sound, faint, a scratching. Maybe, or footsteps. He turned toward the door. Nothing there. But the sound came again. The sound was nothing. A bird, maybe, or the wind pushing something across the frozen ground. He turned back to the crates. 3 days passed before he understood. The first morning, he found a torn tarp in the junk pile, about 3 feet of usable material. He climbed onto the roof carefully, testing each foothold, feeling the metal groan beneath his weight, and spread the tarp over the largest hole. Tied it down with strips of rotted fabric he'd cut from an old blanket. That night, rain came. He lay on the dirt floor, jacket pulled tight, listening. At first, the tarp held. He could hear water hitting the surface above him, pooling, the fabric strips stretched. He heard one snap, then another. Water poured through the hole and soaked the ground 2 feet from his head. He moved to the corner, pulled his knees up, waited. By morning, the tarp hung in shreds. The second day, he rebuilt the wall. Better this time. He studied the crates before stacking them, looked for the boards that hadn't rotted through, found the solid pieces, the ones with weight to them, braced them with sections of broken pallet, wedged everything tight against the rusted metal. The wind came that night too. It found the gaps he hadn't seen, pushed through spaces between boards he thought were sealed. Cold air pooled around his ankles, his wrists, the back of his neck where his collar didn't quite cover. Better than before, but not good enough. The third day, he built a fire pit. He dug a shallow hole in the dirt floor with his bare hands. The ground was harder than he expected, frozen solid beneath the first 2 inches. His fingers cramped, his knuckles scraped against stones. He kept digging until he had a depression about 8 inches deep. He lined the hole with flat rocks from outside. Gathered dry wood, not much, just small branches and a few pieces of broken crate. Lit it with matches from his bag. The fire caught. Flames rose. Heat touched his face for the first time in days. Then the smoke. It had nowhere to go. The Quonset filled with gray haze within minutes. His eyes burned. His throat closed. He stumbled toward the door, pushing it open, coughing so hard his ribs ached. He sat on the frozen ground outside until the fire died on its own. No warmth, just smoke and ash and a throat that felt like sandpaper. That night, he opened the last can, the unknown one. Corn. It turned out, the label had been too faded to read, but the contents were recognizable yellow kernels in cloudy liquid. He ate it cold, scraping the spoon against the bottom until the metal was clean, until there was nothing left. Nothing left now. He sat against the wall, the good wall, the one that held and looked at the Quonset in the dim light filtering through the roof holes, the shredded tarp, the gaps in the walls where cold still seeped through, the dead fire pit with its blackened stones and pile of ash. 3 days of work, and he was almost back where he started. He thought about the bent nails in the coffee can, 40 of them, maybe. Each one had to be straightened before use. He'd been hammering them flat against a rock, one by one, and half of them bent again when he tried to drive them into the soft wood. The other half went in crooked, pulled loose when the wind pushed. Bent nails weren't enough. They never would be. Real nails. Straight ones. That was what he needed. He had $2 in his pocket. In the morning, he walked to town. 20 minutes on the frozen road. His breath hung in the air. His hands stayed in his pockets. Fingers wrapped around the 2 crumpled bills. The hardware store was warm inside. He stood just past the threshold, letting the heat hit him. Sawdust smell, oil, something mechanical humming in the back, a heater clicking in the corner, radiating warmth he could feel on his face. He walked to the counter slowly, looked at the wall of nails behind the register, boxes of them, different sizes, all straight, all ready. The woman behind the counter had gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, glasses on a chain around her neck. She didn't look at him directly, just waited. "Small bag of nails," he said. "Whatever $2 gets." She turned, reached for a paper bag, scooped nails from a bin 1 pound, maybe a little more, set the bag on the counter, took the $2. The register drawer opened, closed. The bell didn't ring. He picked up the bag, lighter than he expected, heavier than anything he owned now. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, didn't say anything back. The bell rang when he walked out. A small sound, booze, final. He stood on the sidewalk, paper bag in hand, cold air on his face, That was everything now. No money, no food, just nails. He walked back. 20 minutes on the frozen road. The paper bag crinkling against his chest where he held it inside his jacket. He kept his hand on it the whole way, feeling the weight of the nails shifting with each step. When he reached the Quonset, he stopped, looked at it. Rusted, leaning slightly, holes in the roof letting in pale columns of light, but still standing. He went inside, set the bag on the ground next to the coffee can. 40 bent nails and 1 pound of straight ones. His entire inventory. "Okay," he said out loud. His voice sounded strange, rough. He realized he hadn't spoken in 3 days, not a word, not to anyone, not even to himself. He sat against the wall, the good wall, outside. The light was fading. Another cold night coming. He looked at what he'd done, the torn tarp, the wall that held but leaked, the dead fire pit that almost choked him. Not enough, nowhere close to enough. But he knew more than he knew 3 days ago. The tarp couldn't hold water weight. The wind found every gap. Smoke needed somewhere to go. He almost laughed. A short sound, dry and quiet. Not funny. Just true. "Tomorrow," he said to the walls. The Quonset creaked. He chose to take that as agreement. He closed his eyes. His stomach made a low sound, hollow. He ignored it. Tomorrow he would figure out food. Maybe set a snare. He'd seen rabbits at the edge of the field, brown shapes moving through the dead grass at dawn. Didn't know how to trap them, but he could try, could learn. Tonight, he had nails, real ones. He pressed his back against the wall and listened to the wind testing the gaps, the metal groaning, the small sounds of a structure that wanted to fall but somehow hadn't yet. Sleep came slowly, in pieces, broken by cold and hunger and the sound of his own breathing. He dreamed of hands, large hands, rough-skinned, calloused, holding his hands, guiding his fingers around a hammer handle, a voice he couldn't quite place, words he couldn't quite hear. When he woke, the light was gray through the holes in the roof, and there was a sound, not wind, not the Quonset settling, something else, underneath the floor, in the dark space between the loose boards and the frozen ground. Scratching, moving. Careful. He sat up slowly, held his breath. The sound stopped, then started again. Closer to the corner now, something was under there. Something alive. He moved toward the corner slowly. The scratching stopped. He crouched down, pulled at one of the loose boards. It came up easily, revealing dark dirt underneath. A shallow space between the floor and the frozen ground, maybe 6 inches deep. Nothing. He waited, listened. Held his breath until his chest ached. Silence. Whatever it was had gone, or hidden itself deeper than he could see. He put the board back, stood up. His head swam. He grabbed the wall, waited for the dizziness to pass. Black spots floated at the edges of his vision. When did he eat last? Yesterday. Half a can of corn. His stomach had stopped growling sometime in the night. That wasn't good. He knew that much. He needed to set snares, learn how to trap those rabbits he'd seen at the edge of the field. But first the wall. He'd been working on a new section. The south side, where the wind hit hardest. This time, he was doing it right. Double-layered boards, nails driven at angles so they wouldn't pull out. Bracing every 3 feet. He picked up the hammer and went back to work. His hands shook. Not from cold this time, from something else. Weakness, maybe, or exhaustion, or both. The first nail went in crooked. He pulled it out with the claw end of the hammer, straightened it against the floor, tried again. Better, Not good. But better. Second nail. His grip slipped. The hammer glanced off the nail head and struck his thumb. Hard. The pain shot up his arm. He didn't make a sound. Just stood there, holding his hand, watching blood well up under the thumbnail. He wiped it on his pants. Kept working. Third nail. Fourth. Fifth. His arms felt heavy. Disconnected. Like they belonged to someone else and he was just borrowing them. The hammer seemed to weigh more with each swing. His shoulders burned. His back ached from bending, straightening, bending again, but he kept going. By the time the light started to fade, he had finished the section, 2 feet wide, floor to ceiling. The boards fit tight against each other. No gaps. The nails sat vertically flush with the wood. When he pushed against it, nothing moved, nothing flexed. He stepped back and looked at it. Solid. His best work since he'd arrived, maybe his best work ever. Something loosened in his chest. Not pride, exactly. Just relief. Proof that his hands could make something that held, that he wasn't completely useless. That all the failures meant something because they led to this. He ate that night. Not much a rabbit he'd managed to catch in a crude snare he'd rigged that morning. Small thing. Barely any meat on it, but protein, warmth. He cooked it over a small fire, the smoke venting through a hole he'd rigged in the roof with a bent piece of metal fashioned into a crude chimney. The fire worked. The smoke went up and out. The corner of the Quonset was almost warm. He fell asleep with his back against the new wall, solid behind him, holding. The sound woke him. A crack, sharp, like a branch breaking underfoot. Then a groan, long and low. Metal wood. He couldn't tell. He opened his eyes but didn't move. Another crack, and then tearing. The unmistakable sound of wood separating from wood. Nails pulling free. He sat up just as the wall came down. The boards he'd nailed that afternoon, the ones he'd been so careful with, so proud of, they bent inward. Then snapped. The whole section collapsed onto the dirt floor in a heap of broken wood and twisted bracing. Cold rushed in. The wind found the gap immediately. Poured through like water through a broken dam. He sat there in the dark, watching dust settle in the faint moonlight coming through the roof. He didn't get up, didn't reach for the boards, didn't count the damage. He just sat. Outside. The wind made a sound, high and thin, almost like laughter. After a while, he lay back down, pulled his jacket over his chest, closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come. When morning light touched the holes in the roof, he still hadn't moved. He stared at the collapsed wall, at the boards scattered across the floor, at the nails, his nails, the ones he'd bought with his last $2 bent and useless now. Some had snapped completely. Others were buried in splintered wood. Something was wrong with his hands. They were shaking. Not from cold, from something deeper, something he couldn't name. He got up. His legs felt strange. Distant. He walked to the door he'd fixed, the one thing that still worked, and pushed it open. The field stretched out in front of him. Brown grass, bare trees at the edge, gray sky pressing down like a lid. He sat down on the frozen ground, facing away from the Quonset. He didn't think about anything. That was the strange part. His mind was quiet, empty, like someone had turned off a switch he didn't know he had. He sat there for a long time, long enough for the sun to move, long enough for his legs to go numb from the cold ground. A memory came. Hands, large hands, rough with calluses, covering his hands, guiding them around a hammer handle. A voice, low, patient, familiar but distant. Tighter. Not harder. Tighter. He couldn't see the face, couldn't remember whose voice it was. Grandfather. Maybe. Someone from a time when people still taught him things. When someone cared enough to correct his grip. Watch what holds, the voice said. Do more of that. The memory faded. He was sitting on frozen ground, alone, looking at a dead field. He thought about not getting up. It was a clear thought, simple, almost peaceful. He could sit here, let the cold take him. No one would know. No one would look. Earl might wonder, eventually, what happened to the kid who bought the rusted Quonset. But probably not for long. He could just stop. His legs hurt. The numbness had turned to pain. Sharp pins and needles working up from his feet. He shifted his weight. The pain got worse. Sitting was starting to hurt more than standing. So he stood. Not because he wanted to, not because he had hope or a plan or any good reason at all, just because sitting hurt. He looked at the Quonset, damaged, the collapsed wall like a wound in its side. He looked at his hands, cut, shaking, still attached to his arms. He turned to go back inside. Movement. At the edge of the field, near the bare trees, small, quick, a flash of brown against the gray. He stopped, stared. Nothing there now. The wind moved the dead grass. The trees creaked. He waited. Nothing. Probably nothing. A rabbit. Maybe. Or a trick of the light. His eyes playing games because he hadn't eaten enough and hadn't slept enough and hadn't done anything right since he got here. He went back inside. The collapsed wall was waiting. The broken boards, the bent nails. He stood in the middle of the Quonset and looked at all of it. Then he bent down and picked up the first board. Not because he believed it would work this time, but because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. And somewhere underneath the floor, in the dark space between the boards and the frozen ground, he heard it again, scratching. Soft, careful, closer than before, still there. He didn't start with the wall. He stood in the center of the Quonset, turning slowly, looking at everything. The collapsed section with its scattered boards, the holes in the roof letting in columns of pale morning light, the gaps where wind still came through despite all his patching, the door hanging crooked on its one good hinge. The door. He walked over to it, crouched down, studied the hinges the way he should have studied them from the beginning. The top hinge was rusted through. Gone. Nothing to save there. But the bottom one beneath the orange crust, the metal was still solid. If he cleaned it, oiled it, found something to replace the top hinge with, it might work. He looked at the frame. The wood was soft in places, rotted from years of rain coming through the gaps. But not everywhere. The left side was still good, hard. The screws would hold there if he was careful. He touched the door itself. Solid wood, heavy, oak, maybe, or something close to it. The problem wasn't the door. The problem was how it was attached. One thing, do one thing right. He spent the morning on his knees, scraping rust from the bottom hinge with his pocket knife. Orange flakes fell onto the dirt floor. Underneath, the metal was dark gray. Pitted, but strong. He found oil in the junk pile, an old can, half empty. The label worn completely off. He didn't know what kind it was. Motor oil, maybe. Cooking oil gone rancid. Didn't matter. He worked it into the hinge with his fingers, feeling the parts start to move against each other. Stiff at first. Grinding. Then smoother, then almost easy. For the top hinge. He used a piece of bent metal from the roof. Cut it with his knife slowly, sawing back and forth until the blade bit through, hammered it flat against a rock, punched holes with a nail, twisting it through the metal until light showed on the other side. The new hinge wasn't pretty. The edges were rough. The holes weren't quite even. But when he held it up to the frame, it fit. The screws were the hardest part. He had to drill pilot holes first. The wood was old, dried out, and it wanted to split along the grain. He worked slowly, turning the nail by hand, pressing just hard enough to bite without cracking. When the hole was deep enough, he set the screw in place and drove it home with the hammer handle, twisting until the head sat flush with the metal. 4 screws. Each one took 20 minutes. Maybe longer. He lost track. By late afternoon, the hinges were done. He lifted the door heavy, his arms trembling with the weight of it, and set it into place. The bottom hinge caught first, then the top. He let go slowly, hands ready to grab if it fell. It didn't fall. He stood back, looked at it. The door hung straight, both hinges holding. There was a gap at the bottom, maybe half an inch, but he could fix that later with a strip of rubber or folded cloth. The important thing was the swing. He pushed the door, it moved, smooth, no grinding, no sticking. He pulled it closed. The latch, he'd worked on that too, bending the metal back into shape. Filing down the rust with a rough stone, the latch caught. Clicked. Held. He pushed against the door from the inside. It didn't move. He pulled the latch, opened the door, closed it again. The latch caught again, held again. He did it 5 more times. Open, close, latch, hold, open, close, latch, hold. Every time. It worked. He stood there with his hand on the wood, feeling the solidness of it. Something he'd built. Something that actually worked the way it was supposed to work. "One thing done," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but the words felt right. That night, he ate better. 2 rabbits from the snares he'd set, he was learning the patterns now, where they ran, what paths they took through the dead grass. He cooked them over the fire, the smoke rising through the bent metal chimney he'd rigged. The system worked. The corner of the Quonset was warm. He fell asleep facing the door. His door, the one that closed. The scratching woke him. Not loud, not urgent, just movement, under the floor, near the corner where the boards were loose. He opened his eyes but didn't move, kept his breathing steady. The scratching stopped. He waited. 1 minute. 2. The fire had burned down to embers, casting orange light across the dirt floor. The sound started again. Closer to the corner now, under the loose boards where dirt showed through the gaps. He'd heard it before, days ago. He'd thought whatever it was had gone. He got up slowly, moved to the corner, crouched down. The boards here were old, warped from moisture. Gaps between them wide enough to slide fingers through. He could see darkness underneath. He pulled up one of the boards, eyes, 2 small points reflecting the ember light, staring up at him from the shadows. He didn't move. The eyes didn't move either. He could see the shape now, as his own eyes adjusted. Small, thin, pressed flat against the frozen ground, trying to make itself smaller, trying to disappear. A dog, not a puppy, but not full-grown either, somewhere in between, ribs showing through patchy brown fur. One ear torn, half-healed, the edge ragged, eyes wide and fixed on him, body trembling a faint shaking that ran through its whole frame. Cold? Maybe. Or fear? Probably both. He looked at it. It looked at him. Neither moved. He thought about reaching for it. His hand actually started to lift. Then he stopped. Something about the way it was pressed against the ground, the way its eyes tracked his hand, the way its muscles tensed, ready to bolt. He knew that look. He'd worn that look. He lowered his hand, slowly, set it flat on the floor where the dog could see it wasn't reaching, wasn't grabbing, wasn't threatening. Then he stood, walked to where his food was stored, a small pile of dried rabbit meat wrapped in cloth. Took a piece, not much, but something. Walked back, set the meat on the floor, 6 feet from the gap, close enough to smell, far enough to not be a trap. Then he backed away, sat down against the opposite wall, closed his eyes. He didn't sleep, just waited, listening. After a long time, he couldn't say how long. Might have been an hour, might have been more. He heard a soft sound. Movement, the scrape of something against dirt. He opened one eye. Just a crack. The meat was gone. The dog was back in its corner, pressed against the far wall, watching him, chewing slowly. He closed his eye, let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Okay," he said quietly, not to the dog, just to the room, to the situation. He didn't try to touch it, didn't try to get closer, just lay there, listening to the small sounds of chewing. When morning came, the light gray through the roof holes, the dog was still there, still in its corner, still watching. But it hadn't left. That night, he slept by the door, across the room. Something breathed, soft, careful, alive. He kept his eyes closed, didn't move. 2 sets of lungs, 1 broken shelter. He'd built the door. Maybe that was enough for now. But in the morning, he would have to decide what to do about the other one. The first thing he did every morning now was look at the corner. Still there. The dog was curled tight against the far wall, head tucked under one paw. It didn't move when he sat up, just opened its eyes. Watched. He left meat on the floor, closer than yesterday, 4 feet away instead of 6. Then he went to work. The collapsed wall section was still a mess. Boards scattered, nails bent. He'd been avoiding it for days, working on smaller things instead. The vent for the fire, the gaps where wind came through the roof seams, the places where cold pooled at floor level. But today he looked at it differently. He looked at his corner, the one he'd built for himself. Layered boards, tight seams, the fire pit nearby with its bent metal chimney. Warm enough for 1 person. Barely. Then he looked at the dog's corner. Exposed. Cold air pooling along the floor where the ground never warmed. No protection from the drafts that snaked through every gap he hadn't sealed. He stood there for a long time. The shelter he'd built was barely enough for him. He knew that. He'd built it for survival, not comfort. 1 person, 1 winter. Maybe, if he was lucky, if nothing else went wrong. But now there were 2. He walked to his corner, touched the wall he'd made, solid, his best work. The boards fit tight, the nails held. When wind pushed, nothing moved. But it wasn't enough. He could feel it in the structure. The thickness wasn't right. 1 layer of wood, even tight-fitted, wouldn't hold against real cold, against the kind of winter that was coming. He'd been lucky so far. The worst hadn't hit yet. He thought about adding another layer, building outward instead of tearing down. But the space was already small. If he built out, there wouldn't be room for both of them to sleep near the fire. One would always be in the cold zone. So, he pulled the first board free. The nail squealed against the wood as it came loose. He set the board aside. Pulled another, then another. It took all morning to take apart what had taken him days to build. When he was done, the corner was empty, just dirt floor and rusted metal wall. The fire pit sat exposed, useless without shelter around it. Wind moved through the space freely now, carrying the smell of snow and dead grass. The dog watched from across the room. It had moved while he worked not closer, but to a different angle. Its eyes tracked his hands, every movement, every board he lifted. He started again. This time, he built the frame first. Vertical posts made from the strongest boards. He had the ones from the original pile that hadn't rotted, hadn't split, hadn't warped from moisture. He sank them into the dirt floor, packing soil tight around the bases with his heel, then horizontal beams connecting the posts, a skeleton. The walls came next, but not one layer. 2. He nailed the first layer to the inside of the frame. Tight seams, angled nails. Then he gathered material for insulation, dried grass from outside, dead leaves, strips of rotted fabric from the junk pile, anything that would trap air, hold warmth, create a barrier. He stuffed the gap between the frame and the outer wall until it was packed solid. Then the second layer on the outside, another row of boards, another set of nails. It took twice as long. Used twice the nails. His supply was running low now, maybe 20 left, and half of those were the bent ones he'd straightened. But when he pushed against the finished section, nothing moved, nothing flexed. Solid. He built it bigger too. Not much. He didn't have enough materials for that, but enough. Enough space for two, enough warmth to share. The dog stayed in its corner while he worked. But it was watching differently now. Its ears weren't flat against its skull anymore. Its body wasn't pressed to the ground like it was trying to disappear. Once, when he dropped a board and it clattered against the floor, the dog flinched, but it didn't run. He picked up the board, kept working. By evening, the shelter was half done. One wall complete, one partially framed. The fire pit enclosed on two sides now, the warmth staying closer, radiating into the smaller space. He sat down to eat. Rabbit again he'd caught two that morning, more than he needed for himself. He ate one, cooked the other, and left half of it on the floor. Closer this time. 3 feet from the dog's corner. The dog watched him eat, watched him set the meat down, watched him move back to his side of the shelter. It waited. A long time. Long enough that he started to think it wouldn't move at all tonight. Then it did. Slowly. One step, then pause, nose working, testing the air for traps, for tricks, for anything wrong. Another step. Another pause. It reached the meat, looked at him, looked at the meat, looked at him again, ate. Not fast this time. Not gulping it down like something that might disappear. Just eating. Normal, the way an animal eats when it's not afraid the food will be taken away. When it was done, it didn't go back to its corner. It lay down where it was, 3 feet from where the meat had been. 6 feet from him. Closer than it had ever been. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge it, just sat there, looking at the half-built wall, listening to the wind outside testing the seams. After a while, he lay down. The fire crackled. The smoke went up through the vent. The new wall blocked the worst of the cold from that direction. Across the room, not that far across anymore, the dog breathed. Slow and even. The sound of something that wasn't running, wasn't hiding, just resting. He closed his eyes. The next day, he finished the shelter, 2 walls done, double-layered, stuffed with insulation. The fire pit fully enclosed now, a proper hearth. Heat radiating into the space and staying there instead of bleeding out through every gap. The dog watched him work. Closer today, it had moved during the night. He noticed. Not to its old corner against the far wall, to a spot nearer the fire. Nearer him, 10 feet away when he started working, then 8 as the morning passed, then, when he sat down to rest and drink water from the dented can he used as a cup. 7. He didn't look directly at it. He'd learned that. Direct eye contact made it freeze up, made it remember to be scared. So he looked at his work, at his hands, at the walls, but he could see it at the edge of his vision, watching him, relaxing, inch by inch. That night, it slept 5 feet away. He could hear its breathing, soft, steady, the rhythm of something that wasn't afraid anymore, or at least, not as afraid. He lay on his side, facing the wall, listening. 5 feet. He could have reached out and touched it if he stretched. Could have closed the distance in one quick movement. He didn't. Some things you don't grab, some things you let come to you. He didn't remember who taught him that. Maybe no one. Maybe he was just learning it now. Outside, the wind picked up. He heard it testing the new walls, pushing, probing, looking for weakness. The walls held. He let out a breath, long and slow. The fire crackled. The dog shifted, its paw twitching, dreaming. Maybe. Something was different now. He could feel it. Not just the walls, not just the warmth. Something inside the shelter had changed, something he didn't have a word for. He lay there, listening to the wind outside and the breathing inside, and let himself feel it without naming it. But in the morning, when he woke, the dog was not where he expected. It wasn't 5 feet away anymore. It was by the door, standing, alert, ears forward, body rigid, staring at something outside. He sat up slowly, quietly. The dog didn't look at him. Its whole body was focused on the door, on whatever was beyond it. He listened. Wind, the creak of metal settling, and something else. Footsteps, coming closer. He got up slowly, reached for the hammer, not as a weapon, just to have something solid in his hand. The footsteps stopped outside the door. 3 sharp knocks. The dog backed away, pressing against his leg. He could feel it trembling through his pant leg. "Hello in there." A voice. Male. Wolster. Familiar. Saw smoke from the road. Just checking nobody's dead. He set the hammer down. Walked to the door. Unlatched it. Earl stood on the other side, same coveralls, same cap pulled low. Face like old leather left out in weather. His eyes moved past the doorway, scanning the interior, the rebuilt walls, the fire pit with its bent metal chimney. The dog pressed into the far corner now, watching. Earl's gaze stopped on him, traveled up, down, taking in what 3 weeks of living like this had done the torn clothes, the dirt ground into every crease, the frame that had gone from thin to sharp-edged. "Huh," Earl said. Just that. Just, huh. He didn't know what to say. So he said nothing. Stood there in the doorway of the rusted Quonset he'd bought for $5, wearing clothes that smelled like smoke and sweat and rabbit blood, and waited. Earl reached into his coat, pulled out a paper bag, held it toward him. "Wife made extra. Said I should check on the kid in the field." He looked at the bag. Didn't take it. Didn't ask what you need." Earl pushed the bag closer. "Asked if you're eating. You're not. Take it." His hand moved before his pride could stop it. Took the bag. Heavy. Warm. The smell of bread and something else, cheese. Maybe. Or meat drifted up through the paper. His stomach made a sound. Loud. Embarrassing. Earl's expression didn't change. But something shifted in his eyes. Something that might have been recognition. "Did all this yourself?" "Yes." Earl stepped past him without asking. Walked into the Quonset, looked at the walls, touched the frame near the door, testing it. Pushed against the double-layered section, nodded once. Not bad. 2 words, but they landed somewhere deep. Then Earl turned, looked at the north wall, the one he'd built early, before he understood what he was doing. Single layer, gaps visible where the boards didn't quite meet. That one's thin. I know. Storm coming. 2 days. Maybe 3. Earl walked to the door, stopped, looked back over his shoulder. Big one. Worst in years. They're saying. Might want to fix that before it hits. He was gone before there was anything to say. The dog came out from the corner slowly, sniffed at the paper bag in his hands. He opened it. Bread fresh. Still soft. A wedge of yellow cheese. Some kind of dried meat. Dark and dense. He sat down on the dirt floor and ate. The dog watched. He tore off a piece of bread, set it on the ground. The dog took it. They ate together. Quiet, the fire crackling. When the food was gone, he looked at the north wall. Thin. Earl was right. He'd built it during the first week, before the failures taught him anything. 1 layer of wood, gaps he could see daylight through. It had been good enough when he didn't know better. It wasn't good enough now. He got up. Time to work. The next 2 days blurred together. He tore down the north wall and rebuilt it. Double-layered, like the others. Stuffed the gaps with dried grass and dead leaves. Tested every joint. Drove every nail at an angle. Checked every seam. The dog followed him while he worked. Not underfoot, it seemed to understand about keeping distance when he was carrying boards or swinging the hammer, but always near. When he stopped to rest, it lay down beside him. When he moved, it moved. He found himself talking to it. "Hand me that board." The dog didn't hand him anything, just looked at him, ears forward, like it was trying to understand. "Yeah," he said, "I know. Just stay there." It stayed. The work went faster now. His hands knew what to do without his mind having to direct them. Cut here. Nail there. Brace this. Angle that. The motions had become automatic. He thought about where he'd learned these things. The memory came in pieces, clearer than before. A workshop. Sawdust smell so thick he could taste it. Oil on metal. The sound of a handsaw biting into pine. Hands. Large hands. Rough-skinned. Covered in calluses from decades of work. Holding his hands. Showing him how to grip the hammer handle. Where to put his thumb. How to swing from the shoulder. Not the wrist. "Not harder," the voice said. "Tighter." Grandfather. He remembered now. Summer visits. Before his parents left. Before the foster homes. Before the uncle who didn't want him. Before all of it. "Nothing gets wasted," the old man used to say, bending over a pile of used nails, straightening each one. "You straighten it. You use it twice. Same nail. Twice the work." He was standing in the Quonset, a bent nail in his hand, and the voice was as clear as if the old man were beside him. "Watch what holds," the voice said. "Do more of that." He straightened the nail against the floor. Drove it into the wood. It held. By evening of the second day, the north wall was done. Solid, no gaps. When the wind pushed, nothing moved. He walked the perimeter of the Quonset, checking every section. Door solid, all solid. Roof? He'd patched the worst of it, layered metal over the holes, sealed the seams with tar from a can he'd found in the junk pile. The list? He found it in his pocket. Wrinkled, soft from handling, pencil marks faded from being touched so many times. He read through the items. Door, walls, roof, fire pit, vent, north wall. He picked up the pencil stub, drew a line through door another through north wall. He stared at the crossed-out words. First time he'd marked anything complete. First time since he'd arrived that the list had gotten shorter instead of longer. Still long, still more than he could probably finish, but shorter. He looked at the dog. It was lying by the fire, watching him. "Getting there," he said. The dog blinked. Its tail moved. Just once. A small thing. That night, he went outside to check the snares. The sky stopped him. He'd learned to read it over the past weeks. The color of the clouds, the way light fell through them, the feel of the air against his skin, the pressure in his ears. Tonight, everything was wrong. The clouds hung low, heavy, thick like wool. A greenish tinge at the edges he'd never seen before. The wind came in gusts, not the steady push he was used to, but sharp bursts that died as quickly as they came, like something breathing, irregular, wrong. The air tasted like metal. He stood in the field, looking up at that sick green sky, and something cold settled into his chest. 2 days, Earl had said, maybe 3. This looked like less. The first snowflakes started to fall, but they weren't falling straight down. They were coming sideways, driven by wind that was already stronger than anything he'd felt since arriving. He ran back inside, pulled the door shut behind him. The wind fought him, pushing back, but the hinges held. The latch caught with a solid click. The dog was already in the corner. The good corner. The one with double walls and the fire pit enclosed. He checked the fire, added wood from the pile he'd stacked. The flames jumped, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. Outside. The wind screamed. He went to the north wall, pressed both hands flat against it. Solid, no movement. The reinforcement he'd done in the past 2 days was holding. The braces were tight. The seams were sealed. East wall, same. Solid. The roof groaned overhead, a deep, metallic sound that vibrated through the whole structure, through the floor, through his bones. He looked up. The patches were holding. The tar seals he'd made were dark lines against the rusted metal. No light coming through where there shouldn't be light. Not yet. The first real gust hit like a fist punching the side of the Quonset. The whole structure shuddered. He grabbed the wall frame, steadied himself. The dog pressed lower into the corner, making itself small. Then the sound started. High and thin, at first. Building. Wind finding every crack, every gap, every place where metal met metal or wood met rust. The Quonset was singing a high, keening sound that wasn't music. It was stress, strain, the sound of something being pushed toward its breaking point. He checked the door, still latched, still solid. The fire flickered as air pushed through gaps he couldn't see, invisible fingers of cold reaching in. He added more wood. The flames steadied, grew. The second gust was worse. He heard something tear, not inside somewhere on the roof, a shriek of metal bending past where metal was meant to bend, then a bang like a gunshot. He looked up. A seam had split near the peak, a thin line of darkness where there should be continuous metal. Snow started coming through. Not much. Just a few flakes at first, swirling down into the firelight like ash. He grabbed a board from his scrap pile, climbed onto the crates he'd stacked against the wall, reached up. The gap was narrow, maybe 2 inches, but gaps widened. He knew that. Metal under stress wanted to tear. He wedged the board into the gap, drove nails through wood into metal on both sides. The wind pushed back. He pushed harder. The nails went in. It held. He climbed down, checked the walls again. Still solid. Door still latched. The dog hadn't moved. Eyes fixed on him. watching. "We're okay," he said. His voice sounded thin against the wind. The third gust didn't stop. It built and built, a sustained pressure that pushed against the walls, the roof, the door, the foundation. He could feel the Quonset bending, the whole structure flexing like something alive, something trying to curl away from the assault. Then he heard it. A crack. Sharp. Wood breaking. The west wall. He turned. Saw the boards bowing inward. The braces straining. One of them had snapped. He could see white splinters where the wood had given way. He ran to the wall, put both hands against the boards. They were cold, vibrating with the force of the wind on the other side. Another crack. The second brace. He looked around wildly. He needed something, another board. A post. Anything to prop against the wall before it failed completely. Nothing. He'd used everything. Every piece of wood. Every nail. Every scrap of metal. The shelter was made of everything he had. There was nothing left. The wall was going to fail. He could feel it in the boards pushing against his hands, the wind on the other side. Relentless. Patient. It had all night. It had nothing but time. If the wall went, the wind would get inside. It would tear the rest apart. The roof, the other walls, everything he'd built over weeks would be gone in minutes. He thought about the door. 20 minutes to town. Maybe less if he ran hard. The storm was bad, but he'd survived bad before. He was young, stronger than he looked. He could make it. Find shelter at Earl's, or the hardware store, or somewhere. Wait it out. Come back when it was over. Start again. His hands were still pressed against the wall, the board still pushing back. He turned his head, looked at the dog. It was in the corner, the safest spot he'd built, curled tight against the double-layered wall, watching him, not running, not trying to escape, not scratching at the door, not panicking. Just there, waiting, like it trusted him to know what to do, like it believed he would do the right thing, whatever that was. He looked at the door. 20 minutes. He looked at the dog. The boards pushed hard against his hands. Something cracked behind them. A third brace, maybe, or the frame starting to give. He sat down, put his back against the failing wall, felt the boards pressing into his spine. Let his weight settle against them, his body filling the gap where the braces had been. "Okay," he said. "We're staying." The wind howled outside like something angry. He braced his feet against the dirt floor, pushed his shoulders back. The wall stopped bowing. The dog watched him for a long moment. Then, slowly, it got up, walked across the Quonset, lay down beside him, against his leg, warm. He didn't move, didn't reach for it, just let it be there. The fire crackled. The wind screamed. The wall pushed against his back, and he pushed against the wall. Hours passed. He lost track of time, lost track of everything except the pressure against his spine, the cold seeping through the boards, the weight of the wind on the other side. Constant, unrelenting. His legs cramped. He shifted, adjusted, kept pushing. The dog stayed beside him. Sometimes it slept, he could tell by the way its breathing changed, slower and more even. Sometimes its ears twitched at sounds he couldn't hear over the roar of the storm, but it didn't leave. Sometime, deep in the night, the wall started to give again. He felt at first a shudder different from the constant vibration. Then a crack, smaller than before, but sharp. He pressed harder, his muscles screaming, his back on fire from hours in the same position. The boards held. He thought about his grandfather, The workshop with the sawdust smell. The hands that guided his hands. "Watch what holds," the old man had said. He was the thing that held now. His body, his weight, his refusal to move. The cold was inside him now. In his bones. In his blood. He couldn't feel his feet. His hands were numb where they pressed against the floor for leverage. But the dog was warm against his leg. The one warm thing in the world. He focused on that. The warmth. The weight of it. Something to hold on to when everything else was pressure and cold and wind that wouldn't stop. The storm peaked somewhere around what he guessed was midnight. A sustained roar that drowned out everything. He couldn't hear the fire, couldn't hear the dog breathing. Just the wind, pressing against everything he'd built, trying to tear it down. He closed his eyes, kept pushing. The wind began to die around what felt like dawn. Not all at once, in stages, the roar dropping to a howl, the howl dropping to a moan, the constant pressure easing, degree by degree. The wall stopped pushing. He waited. Didn't move. Didn't trust it. Gray light crept through the cracks in the roof. Not the gaps he'd patched, just the normal cracks. The ones that had always been there. He opened his eyes. The fire had burned down to embers, orange glow across the dirt floor. The dog was still beside him, head on its paws, watching the door. He tried to move his legs. They didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, pins and needles, fire in his muscles. He stood up, his back screamed. His knees buckled. He grabbed the wall he'd held all night, and steadied himself. The Quonset was still standing. He walked to the door, legs barely working. Unlatched it. Pushed. White. Everything was white. Snow covered the field, the trees, the road. The sky was pale gray, the clouds high and thin, the wind still there, but gentle now. He stood in the doorway, looking out at the new world. The dog came up beside him, pressed against his leg, looked out at the snow. He looked down at it. It looked up at him, held his gaze. First time it had ever done that. Something had changed in the night. Something had finally become the same. He walked the perimeter of the Quonset slowly, checking the damage. The west wall had held. Barely. The boards were cracked where his back had pressed against them all night. White splinters showed at the stress points, but the nails were still in place. The structure was intact. The roof had lost a section near the back, a piece of metal torn free and carried somewhere into the field. He could see pale sky through the gap. Snow had drifted in during the night, a small white pile on the dirt floor that was already starting to darken as it melted. Fixable. The door was fine. The hinges he'd spent a whole day building, they hadn't moved. The latch still caught, still held. He touched the door frame, ran his fingers over the wood he'd shaped with his own hands. His first real success, still standing. The dog followed him as he walked, not behind him anymore. Beside him. When he stopped, it stopped. When he moved, it moved. He started the repairs, not urgent now. The storm was gone. The sky was pale and quiet overhead. He had time. He worked, slowly, carefully. Removed the cracked boards from the west wall. Set them aside, some could be salvaged. Cut down. Used for smaller patches elsewhere. Nothing wasted. The dog lay nearby, watching. Its ears moved, tracking sounds he couldn't hear. Birds returning to the bare trees. Wind shifting through dead grass. The small sounds of a world coming back to life after the violence of the night. He found himself talking to it while he worked. "Need more nails," he said, looking at the pile of bent ones in the coffee can. The dog looked at him. "I know. Figure it out." He sat on the cold floor, straightened the nails one by one against a flat stone. The dog came over, lay down beside him, close enough that he could feel its warmth through his pant leg. He kept working. By afternoon, the west wall was repaired. Not pretty, the new boards didn't match the weathered gray of the old ones, and the patches showed clearly but solid. He pushed against it. Nothing moved. He climbed onto the crates, covered the gap in the roof with his last piece of good tarp, nailed it down at the corners, sealed the edges with the remaining tar. The snow pile on the floor had melted completely now, leaving a dark, wet circle on the dirt. He swept the water toward the door with a piece of board, pushed it outside. The dog watched from inside. It hadn't gone out yet, hadn't tested the snow, hadn't explored the field or chased birds or done any of the things he imagined dogs did when storms ended and the world opened up again. It just stayed, in the Quonset. With him, he went back inside, built up the fire. The flames caught and spread warmth through the small shelter. Smoke rose through the vent, still working, still doing what he'd built it to do. He sat down against the wall, the solid wall, his wall. The dog came over, lay down beside him. Not at his feet this time. Against his side, its head resting on his thigh. He looked down at it. It looked up at him. He put his hand on its head. First time he'd touched it deliberately, not by accident, not brushing past, actually reaching out and making contact. The fur was rough under his palm, matted in places. The dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just lay there, looking at him with those dark eyes. He kept his hand there, feeling the warmth, the weight, the steady rise and fall of breathing. Outside, the light was fading, sky turning gray, then purple, then the deep blue of early evening. The fire crackled, the walls held. The door stayed closed against the cold. He thought about the first night, the $7 on the kitchen table, the walk through town where nobody looked at him, Earl's nod toward the field. He thought about the first collapse, the boards scattered across the floor, the bent nails that wouldn't hold anything, the cold that seeped through every gap. He thought about the morning he sat outside, looking at the dead field, thinking about not getting up. He'd gotten up, not because he wanted to, not because he had hope, just because sitting hurt more than standing. And then he'd kept going. One board at a time, one nail at a time, one day at a time, until somehow the days had become weeks, and the boards had become walls, and the rusty Quonset had become something that could survive a storm. And now here he was, still standing. The dog's eyes were closing, its breathing slowing into sleep, trusting him enough to let go. He leaned his head back against the wall. Tomorrow, he would check the snares, fix the roof properly, not just patch it, but reinforce it. Maybe walk to town, see if Earl's wife had more food to spare. Tomorrow, the work would continue. It always did. But tonight, he would rest. He closed his eyes. The fire crackled. The dog breathed. The wind whispered against the walls, testing but not threatening. He listened. Not to sounds of things breaking, not to pressure trying to get in, just the sounds of something holding, a fire burning, something alive beside him, choosing to stay. His hand was still on the dog's head. He didn't move it. When morning came, the light was clear and cold through the cracks. The sky outside was blue, snow sparkled on the field. He opened his eyes. The dog was still there, still beside him, still warm. It lifted its head when he moved, looked at him. He looked back. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. The dog's tail moved, just once, a small thing, but enough. He got up, opened the door. Cold air rushed in, clean and sharp, carrying the smell of snow and open sky. The field stretched out white and quiet, trees bare against the blue. The world new. He stood in the doorway, the dog beside him, still standing, both of them. There's something quiet that stays after a story like this. Not sadness, exactly, more like recognition, the familiar weight of knowing what it costs to hold on when nothing asks you to. Many of us have built things no one noticed, stayed in rooms that weren't finished, done work that might never be seen. Some of us have been the one in the Quonset. Some have been the dog in the corner. It doesn't need a name. It's okay to let it rest here. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening. There's something quiet that stays after a story like this, something that settles in the chest and doesn't rush to leave. It's not sadness, exactly, more like recognition. The familiar weight of knowing what it means to hold on when nothing asked you to. Many of us have built things no one noticed, carried responsibilities that were never assigned, stayed in rooms that weren't finished, with people who couldn't say what they needed, doing work that might never be seen. Some of us have been the one in the Quonset. Some of us have been the dog in the corner, waiting to see if this time would be different. Perhaps you know what it feels like to be both. It doesn't need to make sense. It doesn't need a name. It's okay to let it rest here, to not tie it up neatly, to carry it a little while longer, or to set it down. Both are allowed. The snow melts, the walls hold. Sometimes that's all we get. Sometimes that's enough. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.